Okay, seeing we have quorum, I'm calling this meeting back to order. We're here for EY 22.1, Request for Directions Report, 2915-2917 Bloor Street West Zoning Bylaw Amendment Application. So we have a number of speakers. When you come up to the mic, please state your name. You have 5 minutes to speak, and then we'll ask you questions. And then after all the questions from you, we'll bring it to the staff, and we'll ask questions staff, and then we will speak and vote at the end. So to move things along on time, our first speaker
Point
is
of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Councillor DeChano.
I'd like to submit a petition that was conducted over the past several weeks in Ward 5 to defend and support the Bloor Kingsway Avenue study, and I'll give it to the clerk. It's 567 signatures in support of this council defending the Bloor Kingsway Avenue study.
Thank you, Councillor DeChano. All in favor of accepting the petitions? Opposed? That carries. That's good. Okay, our first speaker, Gabe Musso. Good evening, Mr. Musso. Welcome, sir. You have 5 minutes. Your time will start here up the top, okay?
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for having this evening session. I really appreciate you guys giving us a chance to voice our concerns. So my name is Gabe Musso, and I live at 32 Bermuda Avenue, which backs directly onto the proposed development site. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the geography at this point, so this is a little different, I think, than most other proposed developments in the area, in that there are residents that back onto the laneway. There's about 10 or 12 of us, and behind us is the proposed site. Before I moved to Bermuda, I lived in a condo building at Bloor and Islington. So I think I come at this from a different angle than most people. When we had this November meeting where the developer was getting together with us and talking to us about this proposed development, I was excited. I liked the idea that other people would get the opportunity that I had to get to know the community through living in a condo. It's a more approachable way to live. It's a more kind of accessible way to live in a community. And it was through living in that condo that I wanted to ultimately purchase a house in the area when I had the opportunity to do so. And so I liked the idea that we get other people to join the community. I was obviously concerned. I back right onto the laneway. I have 2 young children. They play in that backyard every day. And so I was concerned about idling cars in the laneway. I was concerned about traffic in the area. We don't have any sidewalks in our area. I was concerned about, obviously, the density in the neighborhood, but still hopeful, still glad that we'd have this conversation with the developers. I left that meeting, obviously, with some concern, but still glad I had the opportunity to have my voice heard from the developers. As you guys know, so in the months that followed that meeting, the developer went straight to the OMB with their 9-story proposal. That proposal was drastically different than what they'd presented to the community in the November meeting. And what was different was we lost the opportunity to have that dialogue. So as someone who literally has this happening in his backyard, I feel like I lost the opportunity to have that communication with the developers. I feel like anything that I had in terms of hopes that they would be respectful of the privacy of the people that literally are backing directly onto this site, for people that are directly affected by the traffic on the laneway, people that have privacy concerns. I was hopeful that we would have amicable solutions to these problems, and with them going to the OMB, that kind of hope for a dialogue was lost. And so if I could impart anything on you tonight, is just that I hope that the reason that I'm standing in front of you, the reason that I support the adherence to the Avenue study and the 6-story limit, is because I really just have lost faith that the developers will be respectful for the people that are directly affected by this. And of course, we're entirely willing. Everyone I've spoken to, both my immediate neighbors and people in the community associations that have kind of spun up in response to this, all share that same sentiment, that we're happy to have a dialogue. We're all in favor of development to the area. We want new neighbors. We want new buildings. We want development, but we want that development to be responsible. We just want some assurance from the developer that they're going to respect our privacy. They're going to respect the inherent problems that come with increased density, the increased traffic, the increased pedestrian safety concerns. And right now that assurance is lacking. And so that's why I think you have this kind of this response from the community that you can see all these people kind of gathered behind me. This is why, I mean, ultimately I feel like we've lost our voice. And so that's why I think you've got this passionate response. That's certainly been my feeling, that aside from that November meeting, there really has been no kind of form of communication between us and the developer. And it's a difficult thing, especially, like I said, it's literally in my backyard. And I feel like I have no say as to what goes on in terms of what impacts us. And so that's why I was motivated to speak here tonight. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have for me as well.
Thank you very much. See no questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
For the people standing in the door, there's about 3 or 4 seats up here on the right, if you'd like to come up to the front. I know there's lots in the hall, but there's 3 or 4 up at the front here. You good? Okay, our next deputant, Robert Jenkins. Robert Jenkins. Good evening, Mr. Jenkins. Welcome, sir. You have
Thank you
5
very
minutes.
much. I live at 42 Brentwood Road South. I've lived on the Kingsway for 40 years. For 10 of those years, I commuted down to Park Lawn Road from Bloor and Royal York and worked down there. Other times, for 13 years, I commuted to 1 Yonge Street from Royal York Subway. And I've driven out and worked on projects around the city over some of those 40 years. So I'm very conversant with transportation matters in this area and how they affect us. I'm here to support the petition that our councillor has put forward and to oppose anything above 6 stories at this site. I have some handouts. I think you may have copies of them. This is a very unique area. And we're bounded by Mimico Creek on the west and the Humber River.
You can put that on the overhead screen. So we
How
can
do
see.
we do that?
Right beside you there.
Oh, sorry. Oh, face up, sorry. Oh, that's easy. All these modern, I grew up on a fax machine. So anyway, we have Mimico Creek to the west, and we have the Humber River and the Park Lawn Cemetery to the east, and everything is locked in from the north by the CPR tracks. And the traffic in this area is funneled. If you go to Norseman from about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon during rush hour, sorry? Where did I lose you? Sorry? Okay, Norseman during rush hour. Everything is funneled across the bridge over Mimico Creek, and you can stand there in front of the old folks, the senior citizens residence, and you can see cars up over the bridge as far as the eye can see. And this continues on for rush hour. It's a gridlocked area. If you come up Park Lawn Road to Prince Edward and so on and so forth, ultimately most of these people are traveling the Kingsway. The Kingsway goes up to Government Road, and it hooks west to Royal York Road, and just about everything at rush hour is getting funneled onto Royal York Road. And when I go through the transportation report, I see all of the focus is on the laneway behind the building and Prince Edward Drive, and I don't see any discussion of the surrounding streets and how the transportation will work. And I think that's because the focus was for the new avenue study, not for the existing 203 avenue study, which would limit the area to 6 stories, and it would then limit the transportation review by the consultant and the proponents to the laneway and Bloor Street and Grenview. So I think the whole thing is out of kilter, and it ignores the overall gridlocked nature of our community. We're locked in, and there's a very serious limit on any future development. We can live up to 6 stories and we can live within the zoning, but there's a problem going beyond that. The next thing, there's a discussion of the subway, and the subway is there, but the subway comes in and it's full. today it's full, standing room only. And we have, in addition to that one, we have a number of developments around the area, within the region, that just today, and many more are coming down the pike, we're up to 5,000 new units. And what's been going on is people are selling seats on the subway as part of the what am I doing? I'm up? Okay. Sorry. Good for you. Okay, there's a discussion as well about the parking. He says he's not putting in commercial parking because they're saying that they're gonna use the green P parking, which is there for commuters to the subway, not for the commercial buildings. And also, there's no handicap parking.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Our next deputant, Don Sexton. Good evening, Mr. Sexton. Welcome, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for extending your sitting hours to review this matter with the help of various area residents. I echo the concerns that this building is inappropriate for its selected location. This has been thoroughly put forward by city planning staff in their report concerning this application, and put forward by presenters before and after me. I wish to draw attention to the gross floor area multiple, because I want to outline to you that the GFA violation is at the core of the problems with this plan. The bylaw zoning for the subject land indicates 3 times lot coverage. That was the GFA set out by the city bylaw when the applicant purchased the property, and as it was for years prior. The applicant wishes to profit greatly by obtaining the ability to build using a GFA of 4.96, a 66% violation of the bylaw. And as we know, the GFA applied does not account for the oversized balconies in the proposed plans. If the balconies were included, the GFA would be further violated. It means that to construct such a building, the applicant must request outside amenity bylaw requirements to be ignored, must request required bylaw setbacks to be ignored. The building would crowd the sidewalk in the front, and it is asking for not a square meter of lawn to be provided anywhere. All of that is to build the valuable and bylaw eradicating GFA for this building. The avenue guideline floor height ignorance certainly contributes to the flouting of the bylaw established GFA. We can compare this building to the condo structure at Queensway on the Queensway west of Islington. There the buildings were set back 5 meters from the sidewalk and 16 meters from the rear laneway. This allows for a versatile mini private park behind the building for residents to relax and stroll, and also, very importantly, to a relief area for the dogs of the residents. Those condo structures provide an aesthetic appearance for passing drivers, area residents, as well as a very livable environment for the residents of the building. The GFA being requested today in this building does not allow for that. The potential new residents will be without green space of any kind. The owners of pet dogs will be forced to be the bane of the community, as their pet waste piles on the hard surface sidewalks in front and the rear laneway corridor. As I mentioned, I would like to comment on how dangerous the narrow one-way heavily used laneway will be for pedestrians at night. Just on the laneway safety issue aside, this proposal should be feared for its probable causation of grievous injury. The developer, through their signage, wishes to encourage potential purchasers to believe that the very large green space is only 100 meters away. However, that green space is a privately owned Parklawn cemetery, which will surely prohibit soiling dog walkers provided by this building and anywhere else. Parklawn will probably find it necessary to bar all casual walkers, and that will be a real loss to the community. It is recognized that since potential residents are located near the subway entrance, that some will not require a car. So the building is as planned, is providing significantly fewer parking spaces than residential units, 87 spaces for 126 units. That may work in downtown areas such as Bloor and Bathurst developments, but here, the closest grocery store is 2 miles away. The closest hardware store is 5 miles away. Soon, each and every resident will require a car. 31% of the residents will not have a parking space. 39 cars will be left to drift. The question then becomes, where will they park? The application to council and now to OMB must be recognized for what it is. It's a cash grab. That is allowed by a greatly intensified GFA, allowed by eliminating the outdoor amenity space that the bylaws require, and allowed for by limited parking facilities in the building. We owe it to our new community neighbors that they should enjoy the area as much as we do. New neighbors do not deserve to be resident in a faulty building such as the one proposed. Community count, this is not the building for the site. The city planning staff has stated that clearly. With this recognition, this proposed building is substantially not in keeping with the tenets of good planning and good community living. Thank you.
Mr. Sexton, that was right on 5 minutes, too. That was very impressive.
I timed it, so I didn't ask.
2 seconds, we were slow on the clock, but I looked, it was 5 minutes right on the button, so thank you, sir.
Any questions?
No, we're good, thank you. Our next deputant, Dean French. I can't call him Mr. French because I know Dean. Dean, welcome. Good evening. I know you know the rules. You have 5 minutes.
Thank
I'll
you.
be watching your time.
Thank you, Councillor Grimes. I know we have a shot clock in lacrosse, but this is a little longer. First, I'd like to thank City Council members and staff for holding this meeting in the evening and allowing more people to attend. Also like to thank those of you who voted in the 34-5 February 2012 vote for the removal of provincial oversight when it comes to planning in our city. I know Council has voted several times to remove Toronto from the jurisdiction of the OMB. I agree with your colleague, Councillor Jay Robinson's statement. Quote, in my opinion, it's really devastating our neighborhoods. Toronto no longer defines our neighborhoods. I want to thank each and every one of you for standing up for the neighborhoods of Toronto in your capacity as councillors. I saw this firsthand as a volunteer on the Kingsway Residents Against Poor Planning Executive when the OMB overruled the elected Toronto Council and their staff recommendations. Since that time, I've been asked to share our 2008 experience with people who are concerned about overdevelopment and poor planning in their neighborhoods. I chaired the founding meeting of the Glenagar Residents Association in Councillor Holliday's ward and have been providing insight and experience with the newly formed SKCA, Sunny Lee Kingsway Community Association. I live about 4.5 kilometers from the Kingsway Medical Building, but our company has some office space that we rent immediately beside 2915 Bloor Street. So I know it well and the surrounding neighborhood very well. The buildings along Bloor Street West between Prince Edward and Mimico Creek are either 1 or 2 stories in height, and although doubling the building height to 3 or 4 stories would impact the community, the Sunny Lee Kingsway Community Association recognizes the need to increase density and intensification in appropriate areas. In other words, we're on side in agreement with the city staff report and only ask that it reference 6 stories, 18 meters from the Kingsway Bloor urban guidelines. This is why the 2 6-story buildings along that section, the Regency and the award-winning Montgomery building, did not meet opposition or strong opposition when they were proposed. That said, development should be done in a manner that's consistent with the city's established guidelines and the official plan. That's why we appreciate the staff report and its references. Mainly, planning staff oppose this application in its current form as it does not conform to the policies of the official plan OP. In a nutshell, the report states a lot of what our neighbors believe. The proposed height, scale, and density of the proposal is not appropriate within the existing plan context for this segment of Bloor Street West and the adjacent neighborhoods. In closing, it's not about one building. Less than 500 meters away from this proposal, there's a proposal that was originally slated for 6 stories, and it's taken a wait-and-see attitude to how this one's handled. You know, a trend starts when you connect 2 points of data. The rules are 6 stories, 18 meters in height. All we're asking is for the developer to follow the rules and respect the official plan and to respect the neighborhood. We want to avoid a new trend of exceeding 6 stories and 18 meters. It's the cumulative impact of developments on Bloor Street that concerns the neighbors. This isn't just a one-off. As residents, we recognize the need for intensification in appropriate areas. That said, it should be done consistent with the city's established guidelines. We all see going beyond 6 stories as exploiting the desire to get greater density, and it would be contrary to what we see as good planning. We believe that the elected city councilors are best suited to determine what's best for the community. If all the city council is doing is upholding their official plan, then there should be nothing to be appealed. As the city staff report concludes, the proposed development does not conform to the official plan policies relating to the height, the massing, shadowing, and transition, among other matters. The Sunny Lake Kingsway Community Association thanks city staff for their report and would appreciate your leadership as councilors and support and leadership at the OMB. Thank you for your time this evening.
No reset.
Quick question.
Councillor Kent was a question.
What buildings did you say were erected without local opposition?
Yeah, without strong opposition.
Right.
So there's the Montgomery. I know you sometimes frequent the Starbucks
do.
on Bloor,
I've been
across
there.
from the LCBO,
Right.
but there's another Starbucks and that beautiful building on Montgomery.
Montgomery, okay.
Yes,
Right.
that's right across from that Starbucks is it's 6 stories,
Right. Oh, that's
award-winning.
6.
Yes, and then you've got the Regency on the corner, Councillor, on the corner of Roy York and Bloor Street would be the other one.
How tall
That's
is that
6
one?
stories.
That's also 6.
That's right. That's right. That's the trend that's just been established, and it's been based on the official plan. And a lot of our neighbors think even 3 or 4 stories would be high, but we want to recognize what's happening in the city of Toronto and the province. So we're trying to be realistic. So that's why we're on side with the city plan.
So are you with a local residents association?
That's right. So a local residents association has had 2 meetings. First 50 people, then close to 150. A local petition of about 700 signatures, 300 comments. I'm just a lay person, as you know. I have an insurance and pension business, but I did this once before, 10 years ago, and I really think that the playing field is unlevel for residents groups, for city councilors, and the cards seem to be held in favor of the developers. So as a volunteer, they asked me to be a spokesperson here tonight, and we hope to get a new executive up and running, and you won't have me presenting here.
Does the association have access to legal support and planning support and financial support first, then the others follow?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I think the group in Councillor Holliday's ward, the group, the Glen Agger Residents Association, met with me. We went through that process 10 years ago, and so I have a bit of a strategy, a game plan. We raised $140,000 the last time we did this 10 years ago. And so the next step after getting city support, I think the community wants to see their city council supporting city staff councilors. So I think if we see that the city's willing to invest to defend their official plan, I think we can get investors for our side as an association.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and it's a way of giving you information. Are you aware that the city just won a judgment at the Ontario Municipal Board with respect to St. Stephen's Court and 291 and 289, the Kingsway? And they worked with the Humber Valley Residents Association and got a very favorable judgment. Are you aware of that?
No, but it's music to our ears because we know that that's not always on the scoreboard when it comes to residents groups against OMB, so I'm very happy to hear that. We, our group, Councillor, the Kingsway Residents Association, the earlier group that I was on the executive of, Kingsway Residents Against Poor Planning, we were ahead of the Humbertown group, and we actually met with some of their executives, shared some notes, some experiences, some frustrations, and I'm happy to see that worked out.
Just thought I'd pass that along.
Good news.
Dean, can you clarify, does Councillor Campbell frequent the Starbucks or the LCBO?
I've never seen him in the LCBO. I often see him in the Starbucks.
One after
so
the other.
I will clarify that.
Mr. French, you have another question. Councillor Nunziata.
Yeah, you mentioned the local appeal body, right? So you're aware that this application, even with the local appeal body, which is in effect tomorrow, that only applies to minor variances. It wouldn't apply to an application like this. This would still go to the Ontario Municipal Board.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here for your support. As you've
No,
supported us
I
in the
thought
past.
you thought that this would go to the local appeal body, but it doesn't.
Councillor Nunziata, I would just no, my thoughts would, I'd prefer you elected officials to be making these key decisions
Well,
because you know our communities, and
Right.
it is what it is. But
Yeah.
one day maybe we'll get there where these elected officials actually get some say in our great city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Councillor Grimes.
Okay, our next deputant, Fiona Campbell, Kingsway Park Ratepayers Incorporated. Good evening, Ms. Campbell. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Fiona Campbell, the president of the Kingsway Park Ratepayers Incorporated, which has been serving the interests of residents in the Kingsway Sunnylee District now for over 50 years. In reviewing the documents pertaining to 2915, 2917 Bloor, it is interesting to note that the newcomer to this district really doesn't seem to feel that asking for a substantial concession from surrounding neighbors warrants any kind of conciliatory or generous gesture. No extra trees or fencing to screen the neighbors to the south, no extra plantings on Bloor, just a snappy little notice served on one and all to prepare for a costly dash off to the OMB, trailing long lines of expensive lawyers, planners, and distressed residents. This adversarial approach to redevelopment is wrong. It absolutely ignores the millions of taxpayer dollars that have been spent developing bylaws and guidelines to keep neighbors civil. Exceptions to these carefully designed rules should be based on absolute need, not on a subjective want. The shopping district along Bloor was built in 1933 by Homesmith with restrictions to ensure the area did not develop into a motley mess of unrelated architecture. About 20 years ago, the ratepayers, with help from former councillor Blake Kinahan, challenged the application at the southeast corner of Royal York and Bloor to the OMB. The building limit was in fact 4 stories then, and despite our robust argument, the developer managed to win his 6 stories because this was a significant corner calling for greater height and substance, or so he said. Had he been mid-block, the result might well have been different. The subsequent containment of the 6-story building at Montgomery and Bloor was also influenced by the ratepayers, who persuaded that developer that if he rezoned the houses acquired behind that site into the larger parcel, he would face a guaranteed trip to the OMB and a fierce fight. As a result, a rear garden was installed. The building was moved back from Bloor Street, graced with a double avenue of trees, now so greatly admired today. But the writing was on the wall at that time. The ratepayers and planning department immediately convened stakeholders and meetings that resulted in the Kingsway Bloor Avenue study as a reference point for the future, which is now here today. We're not here today asking for any special treatment. We're here asking you to support the work that's been done to ensure orderly, proportionate updating and refreshment of an established streetscape, sensibly planned from the outset. The mid-rise guidelines were passed much later to address broadly the needs of areas without specific avenue studies. They are not a club to be wielded to render our avenue study meaningless. Oversized buildings inserted into the current fabric will produce a harsh and broken streetscape for decades. The application is incomplete in its 9-story iteration, with supporting studies that only refer to the 8-story version. Many devils lurk in these undisclosed details. Questions about the capacities of water, sewer, and other amenities to serve similarly large redevelopments along Bloor, airily dismissed, is alarming. At the start of this fresh surge of rebuilding, taxpayers have to know that these matters are covered, not to be fixed up later piecemeal at greater cost. The reconfiguration of the interior whisks this building from 90 to 126 units, an increase of 40% more units. When overall parking allocations are below what the city calls for, it is clear that the offload will fall squarely on the neighbors, which is inconsiderate and negligent design. But the most egregious element in this application has to be the height. Ceilings can be raised and lowered in the planning stages, but asking for an extra 34 feet of height overall is not minor. It's greedy. 58% taller than the building height of the plan context of the guidelines and zoning laws is brazen. This building protrudes on all sides into somebody else's space. It's too big for the land it stands upon, and the density increase is untenable. The cumulative effect of the developments of this size is clearly injurious for the Avenue study area. We understand that guidelines and bylaws can be appealed, but someone with teeth has to decide what is reasonable and what is blatant, self-serving overreach. This proposal cannot be rationalized as justifiable intensification as promoted by the official plan. We back Councillor DiCiano 100%. We ask that you do so as well for 18 meters or 6 stories at the OMB. Thank you.
Our next deputant, Michael Green. Good evening, Mr. Green. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, members of Council. My name is Mike Green. I live at 26 Brentwood Road South. Out of interest, it's just about half a block south of Bloor Street. An hour ago, I was asked by the chair of the Thompson Orchard Community Association to speak on behalf of our members. It seems he came down with an illness this afternoon. So if I sound nervous and a little ill-prepared, it's because I'm nervous and a little ill-prepared.
Don't be nervous.
Don't be nervous. Thank you. Fortunately, I am speaking after presentations from both the the Sunnylee Kingsway Community Association and the Kingsway Park Ratepayers Incorporated. Both speakers referenced many of the documents, guidelines, studies, and bylaws referenced in staff's request for direction report. And it would be pointless and a waste of your time for me to repeat what they have already said, so I'm not going to do that. What I can share with you is that a very large number of our members signed Councillor DiCiano's presentation seeking to keep this development to 6 stories and fully support his motion at this meeting asking for the same limit. They also signed the residents' petition asking for the same 6-story limit, or 18 meters. In our area, we're very fortunate in having a successful 6-story condo development. The Montgomery, which I heard mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we feel this building, frankly, should be a poster child for providing good use of land on key roadways and within walking distance of the subway. This is the type of development we should be encouraging, balancing the intensification needs of the city and the wishes of the community as a whole. I would ask that Council accept the report from staff and pass Councillor DiCiano's motion restricting the building to 16 stories or 18 meters. As in its current format, the bulk and the massing of this proposed development is totally out of proportion to other buildings in the area. And therefore, again, I would ask that you accept the report and support Councillor DiCiano. Thank you very much.
Mr. Green, you did fine.
Thank
You
you.
didn't even look nervous.
I'm still getting a free beer for this, though.
Get 2. Councillor Campbell, maybe take you. Is there any further speakers to the item? I don't see any more on our list. Is there any further speakers to the item? Mr. Nunziata?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. I wasn't intending to speak because many of my neighbors have already spoken to the merits of this application. I live at 18 Kings Lynn Road, lived there for 30 years. The proposed development is a mere 2 blocks away. I fully support the submissions made by my neighbors, but I'd like to speak to the process. This matter is at the Ontario Municipal Board. They call it an appeal, but you, the elected members of council, have not been given the opportunity to consider this application on the merits. You've been stripped of your responsibility because of the Planning Act. The Planning Act allows a developer to appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board a non-decision. In other words, if City Council doesn't deal with an application within 120 days, it gives the right to the developer to appeal to the OMB. So my first question is, why didn't City Planning staff deal with this matter within 120 days? Because they did not deal with this matter within 120 days, you no longer have the right to make a decision. You can affect the process, but not the decision. The decision will be made by an unelected person, probably one individual, at the Ontario Municipal Board. I have concerns about the instructions that planning staff is recommending that you adopt. The instructions seem to be laying the foundation for a negotiation that will see a building in excess of what the law allows. Rather than simply saying to the developer, you have to build according to what the law is, what the zoning bylaw says, and what the official plan says, planning staff, in recommendation 2, for example, says that, or is recommending that City Council authorize the Chief Planner and Executive Director, City Planning, to continue negotiations with the applicant with the goal of developing a proposal that addresses the issues outlined in the report dated April 18, 2017. Why are they negotiating? Why are they seeking direction to negotiate? There's no negotiation. Council has already adopted the mid-rise guidelines for the Kingsway. So I strongly recommend and urge you not to give city staff the leeway, the latitude to negotiate behind closed doors with the developer. We know what's going on here. The developer came in at 8 stories, saw that there was a lot of opposition in the community, and decided to appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board, not the 8-story application, but a 9-story application. And now city planning staff is saying, well, let's negotiate. Well, they expect to negotiate down to 8 stories. Don't allow that. Instruct your solicitor, instruct your planning staff not to negotiate, to allow the Ontario Municipal Board to make its decision, and there will be certainly a number of community groups that will seeking party status. The city solicitor will be there, but the city solicitor has to know what your instructions are, and that is absolutely to defend the current bylaw and the current official plan provisions for the area. The other concern I have is that a pre-hearing conference was scheduled without direction, without advice, without reference to the city councillor or to council itself. Why was a pre-hearing conference scheduled? That's advantage to the developer, not advantage to the city. The pre-hearing conference, which is a standard procedure in these matters, should only have been scheduled after city council has made a decision with respect to this matter. Yes, it would take more time, but that gives us a stronger position with the developer. The developer can come forward today and build 6 stories as of right. So they can't accuse city council of delaying development, but by agreeing to a pre-hearing conference June 29th for their convenience, that gives them an advantage. If we didn't schedule the pre-hearing conference could be many months from June 29th, which forces the developer to decide, should we build according to the law or should we continue to gamble and move forward? Those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing no questions, thank you. Are there any further speakers today before bringing to committee? This last opportunity. Yes, please come. I didn't sign up. No, please come forward. Please just state your name and your address.
Yes, Phyllis Starren, 34 Bermuda Avenue. I have a concern. I've received conflicting answers about a very narrow portion of the laneway. It's the part which is adjacent to the proposed 9-story condo. It's right next to the parking garage and the loading area. About 5 years ago, I asked our former councillor, Peter Milchin, about the Kingsway Medical Site. I was interested in it because my husband rents from the site, and he has a demolition clause, so I was always following the building, finding out what's happening. And at the time, Peter told me that developers had approached him about the site, and he told me the buildings next to the site had to be purchased and the laneway widened. And he said the city would never approve it otherwise. They wouldn't accept the liabilities. And so my question today is, what's changed? How are emergency vehicles going to get down that narrow stretch of the laneway? It's as long as two buildings wide. And also, how are you going to protect the residents who live in those buildings? That's their back exit. And this is right next to the parking garage. And there's going to be literally probably a greatly increased traffic on that laneway. I don't know how many garbage trucks or how many service vehicles will be needed to provide services for a 9-story building, but I think it's a concern. And that's all I have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any further speakers to the item? Seeing none, we'll bring the committee. Questions of staff. Councillor Campbell, questions of staff.
Question for city planning. How strong is the zoning? How strong do we feel about the zoning, the Bloor Kingsway Avenue study?
Oh, yeah, Amelia, right here.
Amelia, who's answering that question? Oh, okay.
Through you, the chair. The current zoning is as strong as any other zoning in the city. It's a zoning that was in place. It's an avenue type zoning that was put in place in 2003 when the Bloor Kingsway guidelines were put in place as well. So it's a zoning that's as strong as any other zoning throughout the city.
So that being, do the mid-rise guidelines trump the zoning?
No.
They do not.
No, they don't.
This would, were this to go to the Ontario Municipal Board, the zoning would rank in terms of importance and credence greater than the mid-rise guidelines.
The mid-rise guidelines are performance standards that are guidelines to guide development along the avenues, but they are not a zoning bylaw. Some of the elements in the performance standards of the avenues and mid-rise have been placed into zoning bylaws, but they are not a zoning bylaw in itself. And in the mid-rise design guidelines, it states that if there are current areas that have avenue zoning in place and have had an avenue study, then they are outside of this study.
So there's going to be a pre-hearing in June, and this is asking us to provide directions to staff to continue negotiations, and if that, and I'm presuming that will occur, if a negotiated settlement is reached, what is the next step then, and would there be another public meeting to advise the community that planning is on board with a proposed development that would have been a settled agreement? What's the next step in the process?
So generally, council would come back to council and tell you the results of any mediated settlement.
Okay. Directions report. So that would be the a directions report. Isn't this a directions report?
This is a directions.
This is the directions report.
Yes.
So last question is, why wasn't the directions report, why did that not occur prior to the OMB filing?
We don't have control over the applicant's referral to the OMB or the dates that the Ontario Municipal Board gives us. So we have to appear before the Ontario Municipal Board when those dates are determined.
I get that, but the application was in, is it strictly workload? The application was in on the 15th of April. The first report was in September, and the directions report is now in May. Is it strictly just workload that's held it up?
So generally when the applications come in, they're circulated to all of the various departments and we get comments back. It takes a while to get those comments back, and there hadn't been time enough to make a recommendation to council and have a report come to council.
Well, and I recognize 180 days is not reasonable. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nunziata, a question.
Yes, to planning. So in October 2016, there was a community consultation meeting, right? That's in your report. So a number of residents, approximately 60 members attended, and they expressed concerns. And that was with, at that time, with the 8 stories, correct? With the 8 stories. So since October 2016 till today, there hasn't been any dialogue at all with the applicant? Because some of the residents indicated that they haven't even been able to have a meeting with the applicant. So has the applicant refused to meet with the planning staff, or what's happened with this?
I'm going to let Elise speak to that.
And then also my second question to that is, the concerns that were expressed at the October 26th community meeting, and they talked about the laneway and setback, was that ever addressed through any dialogue that you had with the applicant? And when did they apply, when did they appeal at the OMB? January?
So to answer the question, I'm going to step back a little bit.
Okay,
The application came in last spring.
right.
We were not able to host a community meeting during the summertime. First of all, because we tend to not hold those community meetings in the summertime. Then September and October have a lot of religious holidays when we're also prevented from holding those community meetings. So the preliminary report was done in September. But on this one, because there is no OPA, just a zoning bylaw amendment, it's actually 120 days is the statutory requirement, which is just 4 months. And our standard is to respond within 9 months. That's what we aim for. In October, the community meeting was held. And following the community meeting, we did have conversations with the applicant and said, you know, listen, this is what we heard at the community meeting. We heard a number of issues.
Right.
Please go away and think about how you're going to respond to those. And then we would have been expecting some kind of revision to come in. What we received, though, in January was a revision that is the proposal that you see in front of us now for the 9-story building. And within approximately a week to 10 days, the appeal was filed. So typically what would have happened was that after October, there would have then been a series of discussions and negotiations about what changes came out of what was heard at the community meeting, and also direction from staff looking at all of the policies and guidelines and the context for the site. But that process was pretty much halted by a new, a somewhat different application now for the 9 stories, which needs to then be re-reviewed by urban design, by transportation, and by the others. Since then, we have met with the applicant and their lawyers to express to them some of the key issues with the 9-story proposal, similar to what is now in the report, although the report is more detailed than those discussions would have been.
So, but as far as the concerns that the residents expressed with the laneway, the setback, so none of that was expressed. Is that not going to be addressed at the OMB?
Well,
Or is it just from the 9 stories to 6 stories? Is that the only issue that's going to be addressed?
No, there are several issues that are outlined in the
Okay.
report. It's not just the height and the number of stories or the number of units. It's also issues of angular plane, issues of shadow, issues of cumulative impact that are all outlined in the report. On the issue of the laneway, this is currently a one-way laneway. We aim through our official plan to have a laneway widened to 6 meters. However, there is a formula that is applied when you're looking at lane that is commercial on one side and residential on another. And so even with the laneway widening that would be required through transportation services comments, on the commercial side, we don't actually expect to get the widening on the south side. So the lane will be widened along this property, but not to a full 2-way lane width. And so the lane would need to remain a 1-way laneway.
Okay, and then in one of your I still have time for one more question. And one of your recommendations is recommendation 3B, that you enter into section 37. So if you enter into section 37, that's accepting the application.
Well, what
Because
you'll
normally the OMB does not settle section 37.
What you'll notice in that recommendation is that the first part of that recommendation says, should we end up at the Ontario Municipal Board, and should the Ontario Municipal Board choose to approve something, there are certain things that we want to have already direction from City Council to do. One of them is to secure Section 37. Another one is to make sure that the servicing works for this building. Another is to make sure that there's a hydrogeological report. So there are a series of very technical requirements that we need to have council direction to do should the OMB choose to approve something.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor DeGiorgio had a question.
I was looking through the report, and there's one thing that I didn't see, if it's there, and that is the width of the road allowance on Bloor Street at that particular location. What is the width of the road allowance?
I believe that the OP road width is 27 meters, but it is slightly less than that right now. And as a result, the development would be required to provide a small widening at the front along Bloor, as well as the widening at the lane.
So I'm trying to reconcile two things. First of all, we have an avenue study that was done in 2003, correct?
So we have Bloor Kingsway Urban Design Guidelines that were done in 2000, and then implementing zoning bylaw that mirrors the built form and
Understood.
density in 2003.
And I'm very familiar with this kind of development, let me say.
Mhm.
But we had mid-rise design guidelines that were brought in across the city on avenues, which I thought would override whatever designation or zoning bylaw requirement was on this particular site or on this particular location. Am I wrong in assuming that the design guidelines, notwithstanding that they hadn't been escalated to official plan policies, would not override this?
In the mid-rise design guidelines, there's a specific map that is titled something to the effect of areas excluded from these guidelines.
Bloor Street would have been excluded from the guidelines?
This section of Bloor Street is identified on that map as excluded from the mid-rise performance guidelines.
Thank you. What else do I have? So that's what you mean then when I see at the end of the report that this particular development doesn't conform with the official plan?
So the official plan policies about built form and mixed-use buildings speak to a number of things. They speak to street proportion. They speak to massing. They speak to sunlight on sidewalks. But they also speak to looking at the cumulative impacts along avenues. So those are the official plan policies at the high level that it doesn't conform with.
Okay, and my last question is this. We adopted a comprehensive zoning bylaw that again establishes heights just by virtue of zoning. In other words, we've got a new zoning bylaw that establishes, and how does that apply to this? Is this exempt from that new zoning bylaw as well?
So in the new zoning bylaw, 569/2013, that exercise was really about taking 42 bylaws across the city and harmonizing those bylaws. What that exercise did not do was it did not add additional density or additional height to sites. I was in charge for a year on the harmonization of the commercial residential zones, including this area. So I would have looked at what is the height in the old building, on the old bylaw, and I would have carried that forward. What is the density in the old bylaw, and I would have carried that forward.
One final question. If I'm dealing with a major arterial road that is not designated an avenue, and the guidelines apply to avenues only, does that road that is not designated an avenue get the exempt status that this particular location gets?
When you look at the map of the exemptions, it shows specific geographic areas. It doesn't directly relate to whether it had an avenues underlying, if it was shown as avenues on the map. There were a number of cases, many of them may have been avenues, but you have to look at the map too to see the excluded areas. And typically these were either areas that had previously had an avenue study done, that already had updated zoning, and then there's a few other examples that are listed.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ford, the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, have a few questions here. We can start off. So commercial use for parking, in the report, it is outlined that the developer has proposed 0 parking spaces for commercial use?
That's what they proposed on their drawings. However, what is more typical usually is that they will show 0 on the drawings, and what gets built into the zoning bylaw is that the residential visitor and the commercial parking spaces are combined and shared on a first come, first served basis. So Right now, on their drawings, they're showing 0 for the commercial.
Okay. But that's standard practice to share visitor and commercial?
Yes.
Okay. And the other question I have is for city legal, um, and planning, I should say. So through one of the deputant's questions, number 2 pretty much reads to negotiate. How does that, how does this move forward with our planning at the OMB?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the recommendation to negotiate is very standard. We generally put it in all our requests for directions report. It doesn't take away the ability of council ultimately to make the decision on any negotiations that are arrived at. It's also very common in applications to find a way to involve residents groups in negotiation if it should come to that at the appropriate time. It's, as I said, completely standard.
Thank you. And my last question, just a very technical question. So you said that the laneway is going to be, proposed to be a one-way laneway. What are the requirements of width for a two-lane way?
For a two-way laneway, the requirement would be 6 meters. And based on the standard requirements for widening, right now the width is only 3.66.
Right.
This site on the north side of the laneway, the commercial side, is being asked to convey more than half of the land that would be required to get it to 6. That's a widening of 1.67, which would bring it to a total of 5.33, which is enough to squeeze 2 cars past each other, but not enough for a proper 2-lane laneway. So it would have to stay one way.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Councillor Holliday, question.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Ms. Hugh. I was surprised that this was brought to the OMB. Is that typical that developers go and appeal things right after the 120-day period?
I have to make a correction. The applicant did not appeal right after the 120-day period. The 120-day period was up sometime in September of 2016,
right,
and the appeal came in January.
In January. So still, you said it was spring, so it was like a year into this.
Less than a year in. However, I can't speculate about why the applicant would or wouldn't put an appeal in. However, if someone sees that there is significant opposition, they may say, let's get in line.
That's just my point. So you mentioned that there was an event, and then about a week later, the appeal was filed. What was the event?
So there was a community meeting in October.
Yep.
We did have some further discussions with the appellant at some point before Christmas. And then roughly the beginning of January, the applicant submitted revised drawings for the 9-story, and within 5 to 10 days then submitted the appeal. Because then you can appeal the latest drawings.
So they attended a community meeting. Maybe they liked or did not like what they had to hear, and then a week later file an appeal.
No, the community meeting was in October.
Okay.
They put in revised drawings in January, and then a week or so later in January filed the appeal.
Okay, so something triggered them to file an appeal. Would you say that, given that there wasn't a staff report, that that's an aggressive approach? Could you characterize it as that way, or is it typical? I mean, we see these appeals come through after a couple of years of going back and forth, and finally a developer kind of draws a line and says, okay, enough, we'll go to the OMB. But in this case, there wasn't even a staff report on this.
I wouldn't characterize it as aggressive. It's certainly within their rights to do so.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify as well. The report mentions that this does not conform to the official plan. And I guess the official plan is council's policies on development.
Mm-hmm.
The application that they have submitted is for a rezoning.
Yes.
And so staff are of the opinion in the report that we got, the request for direction report, that really it's not a rezoning, it's an official plan amendment. And so if this hadn't been appealed, would we be angling towards something more like a refusal report? If what was, I mean, I know I can't say that that's what you were going to report, but typically when a zoning amendment is submitted, and there's a question of official plan, that usually means, no, staff can't support, theoretically, staff don't support those things.
So what is your question exactly?
Well, had an appeal not been submitted, would we be looking at a refusal report today?
On the 9-story proposal that is in front of
Right.
us, we would be looking at a refusal report.
Staff would have said, no way, it's not a zoning, it's an official plan amendment, and that's a question of council policy. We can't support it.
The proposal that's in today doesn't meet a number of official plan policies around street proportion, around cumulative impacts, a number of things. When you file a zoning bylaw application alone without an official plan amendment, then the zoning bylaw application needs to abide by those policies of the official plan. If you apply for a zoning bylaw amendment and an official plan amendment, then it's looked at more broadly.
Is a zoning amendment kind of a lesser attempt at an approval? Like an official plan is a larger, more complex change,
An official plan amendment is a larger, more complex change.
and generally requires a lot of your work as well, right?
Sure.
Okay, something you couldn't do in 9 months.
It always depends on the circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with council's indulgence, my good friend down at the end would ask one more question.
Yeah, it's very
All in,
critical.
all in favor?
It's a critical question.
Opposed?
please.
Carried.
My question is, an applicant makes an application for a zoning amendment. Planning
George, you
staff-
pull your mic down, please, so we can hear.
Planning staff looks at it and says, if you want to try and accomplish this, you have to do an official plan amendment. We may not be able to support it, but what idiotic applicant would not apply for a zoning amendment on this particular development and an official plan amendment at the same time? Number one. Number two, I just want to.
Well, that was one question.
Well, number two, I just want to clarify what I heard. And you don't even have to answer that question. You basically said if it's a zoning amendment only, they must comply with the OP that's in place. And in this particular application, it's that site-specific OP back in 2003, correct?
No.
No. Which OP are we talking about?
The general official plan, the sort of high-level general official plan.
But that includes guidelines,
Yes.
mid-rise guidelines. And you just told me that doesn't apply to this site.
There are local area Bloor Kingsway urban design guidelines from 2000 that apply to this site, but they are not policy. They do not form part of the official plan. They are guidelines. There is also zoning that implements those guidelines that allows for as-of-right development up to that 6 stories. Then there are the mid-rise performance standards. Those are guidelines, but they specifically in their maps exclude this area.
Okay, so the OP that this site has to conform to is the 2003 Avenue study, or the zoning bylaw that puts that OP in place?
No, because that's not OP. There are there's the official plan, and
Which OP does
any,
it have to conform with? That's all I want to try and understand.
the 2006 Toronto
2006
citywide
one.
official plan.
Okay,
Yes.
that's fine, thank you, that's what I,
That was 6 questions, Frank.
no, 2 squared.
Okay, seeing no further questions. Thank you, Councilor DeGiorgio. Thank you. We'll bring it to speakers. Councilor DeChano. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have a question? Oh, no. You speak first? No, you go first. Councilor DeChano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a motion to put up on the screen. That Etobicoke York Community Council recommend that City Council direct the city solicitor and appropriate city staff to attend the Ontario Municipal Board to defend the Bloor Kingsway Avenue study and the 6-story height limit set out in the associated zoning bylaw 914-2003 and authorize the city solicitor to retain any outside consultants as necessary.
Do you have to move the rest? Do you have to move the rest?
As well as of course, we're going to as well move the report. And I do that because we have bylaws for a reason. And this particular community spent years and years and years working with planning and with the city to establish certain development expectations. And we have Ms. Campbell, who said it quite correctly. This is very distressing when you put that kind of time and energy into something and the rules are forever changing. Although they are forever changing, I think this one is winnable. I think we have something here that is precedent setting, and It's not minor compared to what was established in 2003. It's 30 feet higher. It's 40% more GFA. So we are going to go to the OMB. We are going to work as hard as we can to establish arguments that defend the avenue study, and I believe we will prevail. I want to thank all the residents that came out tonight. I know many of you, I see familiar faces, were with us a few weeks ago. There was probably 500 of us a couple of weeks ago. Those of you that can't be in the chamber tonight that are in the hallway, thank you as well for coming. And the chair tonight said it's amazing how you only had 7 questions asked with 7 speakers with this kind of a crowd, and I let them know that a few weeks ago there was many more questions. So it certainly makes a difference when you have this kind of effort from the community speaking out loud. The petition's going to make a difference. We will keep you informed along the process. If anyone hasn't signed the petition, there's still an opportunity to go on our website and do so. We can always resubmit those additional names, and we'll see how this goes on June 29th. So thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight, and we'll keep you all posted.
Thank you, Councillor DeChano. Councillor Holliday to speak.
Yeah,
We haven't voted yet, folks, so we haven't voted yet, so it's not over yet.
I just want to say thank you as well to everyone that came. I went through a couple of tough development applications, still going through some, and I can attest that it certainly helps when the community comes together and rallies. And I can see how much of an articulate and organized group you are tonight. It makes a huge difference. I hope the developer has someone in the audience or is going to watch the tape of this, because it really shows you came out, you delivered speeches that were right on point. And I'll tell you, I know this area very, very well. I was listening to the gentleman that was talking about Royal York being backed up. Well, you know what? I went to high school at Royal York and Norrisman, and I used to walk up there every day 25 years ago and watch the cars. I got married in a church at Bloor in Royal York. My first daughter was baptized there, and I know you can't get a parking spot. I know that if I go to Crooked Q, you can't get a parking spot at night. And I know the Montgomery building, and in fact, a good friend of mine lived there, and we had many a party up on the top floor on the roof there. It's an amazing development, and it's something that I keep in my mind and remember as a place that we should see more of on Bloor Street. And I laud the community for pointing to those examples. I think what you're going to see tonight is the warship turned to bear right on this. I see the actions of the developer as aggressive. I can characterize them as that. To go and appeal something before there's a staff report following a community meeting where there was outcry and ask for something that the report says right here is overdevelopment, and it doesn't meet our official plan. I think we as council members need to defend our official plan. It's what shapes our city. It's what keeps the communities the way we love them and we know them and we want them to be. I think you've got a great councillor here, and he's going to need your help in this fight. I know I just went through it with some great community associations that are continuing to work. Please stay organized. Remember, there's no way around this than good old-fashioned hard work. Roll up your sleeves, keep doing the research, critique every document you can get online, and be prepared to line up if there is a hearing and it gets to that point. But I can see that the tactics have been aggressive to this point, and I hope you rise to the occasion, and I hope that your councillor can harness your power, because I know he can, and I wish you good luck on this, and I will love to continue to enjoy that stretch of Bloor Street. Congratulations to all of you.
We have one more speaker, Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, thank you. I will be supporting the local councillor. I think it's frustrating for me because one of the deputants mentioned, and other than the community meeting that was held in October 2016, the community hasn't had an opportunity to comment on the application. And when an applicant comes in and submits his application and it doesn't get processed and we don't have the opportunity for the community to give input, then going to the Ontario Municipal Board, we're not involved in that. The community's not involved in it. They can't get what they want because it's the negotiations is done with our planning staff and city solicitor and the applicant. And most applicants know that. So when they put in an application and they know that the community or the city staff are against the application, they'll go directly to the Ontario Municipal Board. They can't be bothered going through the process. It takes so long. They know it's going to be a refusal report, so they go directly to the Ontario Municipal Board. And that's the way most applications that come forward, they go directly to them, because normally the Ontario Municipal Board always supports applications, and that's why we hate the OMB. That's why we've been trying to get rid of them. But, you know, for example, I have one in my ward. The original application was 99 units, and because we didn't process the application, this is at Weston 401, the applicant comes in with 500, and they're at the OMB for 500 units. The original application was 99. So now we're at the Ontario Municipal Board arguing, debating the 500, and 99 should have been what we should be arguing and having consultation meetings with the public. So we're kind of left out, and so I understand, you know, the staff mentioned that they didn't receive comments from the various departments and that, and so there wasn't an opportunity for the local councillor to have a meeting where the community actually had input to deal with all the issues that were brought up in the October 2016 meeting. There were a number of concerns that were expressed that day. Hopefully they get addressed at the OMB. So it's really frustrating for me when this happens and we get so many applications that go through this process, and it's just very frustrating, not only for the community, but for members of council. So thank you to the community that's here. Thank you.
Okay, I called last speaker, but now my friend on the end wants to speak. Councillor DeGiorgio.
Just very briefly, okay? Very, very briefly. I had a very similar application, okay? The only difference between my application and this application is that this application had the benefit of a community council meeting, where that gentleman had an opportunity, and the community had an opportunity to speak at community council. My application went from the appeal directly to the OMB, bypassing this community council meeting. So I've seen what can happen on applications that proceed to the OMB. I'm also fearful that the consequence coming out of this application may be very similar to what happened to mine, even though they eliminated the community council. I hope it's kept to 6-story, because that's what it should be, and it should be no more than that. But I'm just saying, and you're going to hear about my case, because 5 years ago is when the decision was handed down, or at least the original decision was handed down, and I'm going to the OMB next week to still hassle that application. The building's already up, and in my view, the final decision has not been made. Because of all the irregularities, I never had the opportunity to have that application come here and scrutinize it.
Thank you,
That's
Councillor.
the kind of battles I have to fight.
Okay. So the motion is on the screen. I'm going to ask Councillor DeChano to read it out one more time for the benefit of the people out in the hallway. I know the people in here on the screen. But Councillor DeChano, could you read your motion and we'll vote on it?
For sure, and if I can get a recorded vote, Mr. Chair, that Etobicoke York Community Council recommends that City Council direct the city solicitor and appropriate city staff to attend the Ontario Municipal Board to defend the Bloor Kingsway Avenue study and the 6-story height limit set out in the associated zoning bylaw 941-2003, and authorize the city solicitor to retain any outside consultants as necessary.
Thank you, Councillor DeChano. He's asked for a recorded vote. All in favor of Councillor DeChano's motion? Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Nunziata, Deputy Mayor Crisanti, Councillor Grimes, Councillor Holiday, Councillor DeChano, Councillor Campbell, and Councillor Ford. That passes unanimously. Item is amended. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Ford, you have a motion to introduce and enact certain bills.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that the Etobicoke York Community Council pass and declare as bylaws Bill 500, prepared for the May 2nd, 2017 meeting 22 of the Community Council.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Holiday, you have a motion to introduce and enact the confirming bill.
I do, Mr. Chair, that the Etobicoke York Community Council pass and declare as a bylaw a confirmatory bill to confirm the legislative proceeding of the Etobicoke York Community Council Council acting under delegated authority at meeting 22 on May 2nd, 2017.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion to adjourn, Councilor DeChano. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.